Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's topic is dwellers of the underground. Now, the past few videos that I've been doing, I have really been touching on biblical cosmology, but not so much as of what's at the surface, but what is below us or sometimes above us. So as you can see here, this is an illustration of the biblical earth. We have the surface here. We have what we can tell here is part of the firmament. We have the foundations of heaven, or sometimes called the pillars of the earth. This is cut off, but it would say the waters of the great deep, or maybe the waters of the abyss. It's called both things, which I did discuss in my last video. And then we also have Sheol, which I discussed, I'm thinking 2 videos ago, I'm not quite sure, but I did discuss Sheol. That is basically the world underneath us, the underground, the subterranean level of the earth. And I just want to point out this serpent here. I think that this is really interesting that they have this in this picture, and I'm hoping to remember to get back to that in a little bit. But today's video, I'm not going to talk much about underground, but more about the beings that are said to live underground. Because very often, we hear stories, whether it's Native American legends, it could be European legends, African legends, just all over the place you hear stories of humanoids or some type of creatures that live underground. And we just laugh them off. Like I just called them legends, we call them folklore, we call them fairy tales. And if we actually take a look at what is beneath the earth, is it really too much to speculate to think that there might be things living beneath us? And I have to say that I know that a lot of people in Christian tradition believe that that would be unbiblical to have other sorts of beings. It would be just as unbiblical to think that there are aliens out there. But and I could be wrong, but I've never seen anything in the Bible stating specifically that humans were the only creatures other than the angels that the Lord created. Now, I have to also say that I read a book by Timothy Alberino called Birthright, and I highly recommend it. I'll leave a link in the description box to it. But he makes a very good case for the fact that there could very well be all sorts of beings, not just on our earth, but also just maybe outside of the firmament somewhere. Now, he doesn't ascribe to biblical cosmology in that manner, but the fact remains that there's a definite possibility that things that don't look like us could have also been created by God. Now, their story is completely different, and the Bible was written for us. But we do need to keep that in mind. And I'm going to make a video about that in the future. That could possibly be my next Question the Narrative video, unless I get sidetracked and end up doing something else. But I just wanted to get that out of the way. So first of all, I just wanted to take you to a place called Derinkuyu. Now, the reason that I'm bringing you to Derinkuyu, which is in Turkey, is just because I wanted to show you a really good example of the fact that there very well could be cities underground. Well, there are cities underground. We know this already. And so people could live underground. And if you just Google Derinkuyu, you would just see some astonishing photos of what it actually looks like down there. And this would actually be a good deep dive for another video, but I'm not going to talk too much about it today. I just wanted to show you, that yeah, it's definitely possible to live in the subterranean parts of the earth. Now, I am going to come back to this article about it in a little bit, just because it ties in with some of the things that I'm going to be talking about, but we're going to do that later. What I want to start with now is I want to touch on some of the creatures, some of the humanoids, some of the beings, people, whatever you want to call them, that are said to live below the surface. And I think we need to start thinking, maybe there's more to the story. Now, the very first one that I wanted to get into was something that was actually mentioned in a comment. It was a while back. Somebody asked me if I had ever heard of this, and I absolutely had not heard of this. I wish that I would have screenshotted, is that a word? The person who did the comment so that I could, at least give them credit for it. But I'm sorry if you are the one who commented about this. Thank you. But the Green Children of Woolpit. Let's start here. The title of the story may sound immediately implausible to the cynics among you, but surprisingly, this is one tale of folklore which is probably founded on some basis of truth. And we have to remember that all folklore is based in truth. We just have to remember that. Anyway, the legend of the Green Children of Woolpit starts during the reign of King Stephen in a rather tumultuous time in England's history called the Anarchy in the mid-12th century. Woolpit is an ancient village in Suffolk named after, as one might gather from its name, an old pit for catching wolves. Next to this wolf pit in around 1150, a group of villagers came across two young children with green skin, apparently speaking gibberish and acting nervously. According to writings at the time by Ralph of Coggeshall, the children were subsequently taken to the nearby home of Sir Richard de Calme, where he offered them food, but they repeatedly refused to eat. This continued for some days until the children came across some green beans in Richard de Calme's garden, which they ate straight out of the ground. It is thought that the children lived with Richard de Calme for some years, where he was able to slowly convert them over to normal food. According to the writings of the day, this change in diet led to the children losing their green complexion. The children also slowly learned to speak English, and once fluent were asked where they had come from and why their skin was once green. They replied with, and here's the most interesting part, "We are ignorant of how we arrived here. We only remember this, that on a certain day, when we were feeding our father's flocks in the fields, we heard a great sound, such as we are now accustomed to hear at St. Edmund's when the bells are chiming, and whilst listening to the sound in admiration, we became on a sudden, as it were, entranced, and found ourselves among you in the fields where you were reaping. The sun does not rise upon our countrymen." So let's just repeat that. The sun does not rise upon our countrymen. "Our land is little cheered by its beams. We are contented with that twilight which among you precedes the sunrise or follows the sunset. Moreover, a certain luminous country is seen, not far distant from ours, and divided from it by a very considerable river." So let's just go back to where it says this here. The sun does not rise upon our countrymen. And that would give rise to the belief that these children could possibly have come from underground or from what some people might call the inner earth. And, the whole idea makes me think of Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth. And that's just something that I would really love to just study, that whole topic of the Middle Earth folklore, because I love the movies, I love the books, but I've never gotten too much into that. But that's what this whole thing makes me think of. Not just this story, but the whole idea that, there could be other populations underneath our feet. So here we have the story of the Green Children of Woolpit. They were speaking gibberish, so they were not speaking, a language that anyone understood. And they said that they came from a land where the sun never rose. So could it be because they were inside the earth and not on top of it? Now, there is an explanation for it, so I would remiss if I skipped that, but the most likely explanation for the Green Children of Woolpit is that they were the descendants of Flemish immigrants who had been persecuted and possibly killed by King Stephen. Lost, confused, and without their parents, the children could have ended up at Woolpit, speaking only their native tongue of Flemish, perhaps explaining how the villagers thought that they were speaking gibberish, which would make sense. If you hear people speaking a language that you don't understand, yeah, it would be gibberish to you. And then it goes on to say that it's believed that the green skin could have been from malnourishment, which is, again, plausible, but what really makes it intriguing is just the description of where they came from. So let's just move on to the story of Admiral Byrd. And this is, a Hollow Earth story. Now, I know that Admiral Byrd is a 33rd degree Freemason. I know that. So we have to take this entire story with a grain of salt. But I think that most of us know that they like to throw some truths out there mixed in with the fabrications, the outright lies. And so it's still interesting to look at what Richard Byrd had to say about his encounter when he was. Now, this says South Pole. I had always heard that it happened at the North Pole, but regardless, let's just see what he had to say. Medal of Honor recipient Admiral Richard E. Byrd allegedly wrote his encounter with a lost civilization in Antarctica. According to Hollow Earth theorists, Byrd met ancient race, and I think I should have said Byrd met an ancient race underground in the South Pole. Okay. And it says, how was this left out from Byrd's mission? Operation High Jump? Could it be one big hoax? Conspiracy theorists love to fantasize. And it says, according to Byrd's diary, the government ordered him to remain silent about what he witnessed during the assignment. And I always leave links in the description box to the videos, or not to the videos, to the articles that I read from. So I'm not going to read the whole thing because I just really wanted to get into what he said he came across. And this is just a diagram, and it says Agartha, Antarctica secret, that's why it confuses me, because I had always heard that it was North Pole, and that would be the Arctic. Yeah. And oh, yeah, so this does make sense. So here it says Antarctica secret, and that would be in the South Pole region. But again, anyway, you kind of hear back and forth between it. But there it says that there's Agartha, the land of advanced races, the city of Shambhala, man-made tunnels, and then it shows up here, it's the Pyramid of Giza, and it shows that there's tunnels coming down from King Solomon's mines. Here's the ocean. It's really interesting if you would want to take a look at all this. There's coming from Manaus, Kentucky Mammoth Cave. They also, but the point is that they all have these tunnels that go underground, and we know that there are tunnels underneath us. I've done videos on them. Lots of people have done videos on them. So the whole idea again of an underground world is not that far-fetched. So for thousands of years, people all over the world have written legends about Agartha, the underground city. Did Byrd find it? He met the master, the city's leader, who told him of his concerns about the surface world. Our interest rightly begins just after your race exploded the first atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. It was that alarming time we sent our flying machines, the Flugelrads, to your surface world to investigate what your race had done. You see, we have never interfered before in your race's wars and barbarity. But now we must, for you have learned to tamper with a certain power that is not for your man, mainly that of atomic energy. Our emissaries have already delivered messages to the power of your world, and yet they do not heed. Apparently, the government knew about Agartha before Byrd. According to the master, places such as Tibet, the Great Pyramid of Giza, and the North Pole, okay, so there are some there from there too, all have tunnels leading to Agartha. So that is, again, taking it with a grain of salt. I guess you could really take all of these with a grain of salt, but another story of a race that lives under the ground. And let's just move on to the next one. The Moon-Eyed People. According to both Appalachian folk tales and Cherokee legend, a group of pale-skinned humanoids called the Moon-Eyed People might be hiding somewhere in the Appalachian Range. Typically associated with the small town of Murphy, North Carolina, the Moon-Eyed People are short, stout, and white-skinned, with bearded faces and large blue eyes. Their eyes were supposedly so sensitive to the sun that they remained nocturnal, which is why they're called moon-eyed. Legend says that the local Native American tribes waited for the full moon to drive the Moon-Eyed People from their underground caves. The bright light made them weak, forcing them to flee into other parts of Appalachia for good. Unlike other Appalachian monsters, the Moon-Eyed People were considered to be a distinctively separate race of people, rather than supernatural beings. It might seem obvious to readers, but the Moon-Eyed People were most likely just European settlers. But what makes the legend so shocking is that it dates back hundreds of years before Christopher Columbus, quote, discovered America. And really, is it really so shocking? It's not, because I think we all know that Christopher Columbus did not discover America. There were, people here before that, and he wasn't even the first European to discover America. Because at the very least, we know that the Vikings were here, but that's even going by what history. Oh, it's so sad to live in a world where we just don't know what history is true that we're being told. So anyway, So are the Moon-Eyed People just another Appalachian Mountain scary story, or just early European settlers who never received their due credit? Well, we don't know, but there we have another story of a race of people that live underground. Now, the next story, or the next legend, folklore, whatever you want to call it, the ant people of the Hopi, I've talked about in several videos, but I'm still going to address it here in case you've missed those. But one of the most intriguing Hopi legends involves the ant people, who were crucial to the survival of the Hopi not just once but twice. The so-called First World or World Age was apparently destroyed by fire, possibly some sort of volcanism, asteroid strike, or coronal mass ejection from the sun. The Second World was destroyed by ice age glaciers, or a pole shift. I'm going to stop at this point just to say that just because I am reading the article does not mean that I believe everything that it is saying, because I have had some very disgruntled commenters who have gotten very angry at the articles that I've read and just basically amounting it to the fact that I must believe everything that I'm reading. And no, I'm just reading the article just because I think that it's good to keep an open mind and to, take in as much information as you can. So just like, on Twitter, they're like, my tweets don't necessarily mean that I support it. Well, that's what it means here too. It means that I find it interesting and it goes with my video, but it doesn't always mean that I agree 100% with the article. Anyway, during these two global cataclysms, the virtuous members of the Hopi tribe were guided by an odd-shaped cloud during the day and a moving star at night. What does that sound like? That sure sounds like the Exodus to me, doesn't it? That led them to the sky god named Sotuknang, who finally took them to the ant people. In Hopi Anu Sinom, the ant people then escorted the Hopi into subterranean caves, where they found refuge and sustenance. In this legend, the ant people are portrayed as generous and industrious, giving the Hopi food when supplies ran short and teaching them the merits of food storage. In fact, another legend says that the reason why the ants have such thin waist today is because they once deprived themselves of provisions in order to feed the Hopi. So first of all, I think that it's important to point out that they call them the ant people. Ants have very large eyes, and you would think that if a creature is living underground, it would also have large eyes because it would need to be able to take in as much light as possible. Another thing that I wanted to say was that it talks about how the ant people in this legend are portrayed as generous and industrious. And that's actually something that you will see. I allude many of the creatures that are said to live underground to the race of fallen angels or of the Nephilim. And other cultures seem to embrace the Nephilim as good, powerful, positive creatures, where it is only, in the Hebrew history and in Christianity that the Nephilim are not looked at so kindly. So I just think it's interesting that the ant people are portrayed here as generous and industrious. And I have to wonder, were they really, or were they up to something? And this is the last one that I'm going to look at today. And this one is the reason that I want to go back to that illustration in a little bit. But let's just read what this has to say. This is the Naga. So, and it's from Hindu mythology. The Naga is a member of a class of mythical semi-divine beings, half human and half cobra. They are a strong, handsome species who can assume either wholly human or wholly serpentine form and are potentially dangerous but often beneficial to humans. They live in an underground kingdom called Nagaloka or Patalaloka, which is filled with resplendent palaces, beautifully ornamented with precious gems. So again, we have a being that is living underground in an underground kingdom, half man and half cobra. And I just want to remind you of the story of Genesis, of the serpent coming into the garden. Now, the word and that actually tempted Eve with the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So let's see what word is used in the Bible for the serpent? It's Nakash. And what does Nakash mean? It actually means serpent. The word Nakash is the actual Hebrew word for serpent used in the book of Genesis. Nakash actually has three uses in one. As a noun, it means serpent. As a verb, it means to divine. The Nakash means the diviner. As an adjective, it means shining. The Nakash means the shining one. So that certainly would make you think, could the Naga have something to do with the Nakash? Maybe not, well, I'm sure even specifically with, the serpent in the garden, with Satan himself. And going further from that, we often hear of what people call reptilians. Reptilians have always been one of those topics that I've kind of shied away from because I'm like, okay, that just might be going too far. But there are, and now I'm starting to think, okay, maybe there's more merit. It might not be specifically what people think, or it could be, but I think that the story does have more merit. And what is believed is that the reptilians could very well be some sort of fallen angel creature, or some sort of Nephilim creature. But basically, they have a lot of authority in the world today. Now this is what the theory is about the reptilians, and that the most powerful people in the world, if they are not reptilians themselves, I'm not saying that they are, I'm just saying what people believe, but they could also be the ones that are behind those powerful people. And that is more what I'm thinking, that they could very well be in control of what we're looking at as, what we could call our secret government, or the ones that we always call they, in this community. We always say they're the ones who are controlling everything. They're the ones who are using neuro-linguistic programming, and this is the they that a lot of people are referring to. So when you actually look at stories like the Naga, like the Nakash, is this all linked together? And again, we've got the Naga living underground, and we have the reptilians. And I wanted to point out one thing. If you think that the Naga, the Nakash, the reptilians have anything at all to do with angelic beings, I want to just go back to Derinkuyu, which I showed you at the beginning of the video, and let's just look at who they believe built it. And again, this is just something that you have to take with a grain of salt, but it's interesting what they say. Historians believe that the Hittites or the Phrygians were among Derinkuyu's earliest builders. So they believe that the Hittites or the Phrygians built Derinkuyu, this vast complex underground. And here's an interesting thing. The Hittites were believed to be Nephilim. So we have all of these things linked together with the Nakash in the garden, or the Naga, as they might call it in the Hindu mythology. And then we have what they call the reptilians. And even if it wouldn't be specifically that sort of creature, we have all of these other these other races of beings living underground. And right here we have in mainstream history telling us that the Hittites were believed to be the possible builders of one of the greatest complexes underground, Derinkuyu. And right here we're told that the Hittites were Nephilim. So, and that's, now I almost forgot. And that's where I wanted to go back to that graphic. So here we have the serpent. And I just think that it's just funny that here it is down here underneath the earth. And we were just talking about the serpent in the garden, also called the Nakash, the Naga, reptilians. And, could there be something to all of this? I don't know. but it's certainly interesting to think about, isn't it? That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.